Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Economic and Community Development Committee meeting. Today is November 14th, 2022. I am your chair, Tony Troutner. I am joined today by my colleagues, Councilmember Michaud and Councilmember Larmer. Let's go ahead and get started. Are there any changes to the agenda today? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the items of business. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our September 22nd meeting, or I'm sorry, September 12th. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will pass the minutes unanimously and move on to our first information-only item. It is the annual housekeeping amendment, and I'd like to welcome Kaelene.
Hello. All right, there we go. I've got some very exciting things for you today. And by very exciting, I mean this is very procedural, and I'll try to make it not the most boring thing you'll hear today. So, our housekeeping amendments for 2022. Also for the camera, I'm Kaelene Nobis, the Senior Long-Range Planner with the Economic and Community Development Department. So, this was just for fun. What is housekeeping? This is a photo of my 3.5-year-old son. I hope that today is not as painful as him learning to watch this pop. But I just also thought it was super cute and I wanted to include it for fun. But anywho, housekeeping is yearly or bi-yearly updates we do to the minutia of code. So we often find small errors or scriveners or things that need to be fixed about our code, or items that need to be updated to clarify intent or be up to date with state law. So I've got 7 items that we're going to talk about today. I'll go over them at like a high level as to what the reason behind the update is, and then a little bit more into kind of the substance. So let's just dive right in. His name's Theodore, by the way. So this is the first step in my legislative process to get these adopted. And we're also going to land use and planning board tonight to do an information only. And then a public hearing on the 28th, public ops on December 6th, and hopefully adoption for council on December 13th. So most of the changes needed, or all of the changes needed, can fit into 2 buckets. They're either needed because of a legal reason or a clarity reason. 3 of which are definitions updates, and some of them are cleanups for removal of erroneous footnotes, or some clarification needed for nuances that were lost in code in years past. And so we'll just kind of talk about each of them real briefly. So there are 3 definition changes. The first is the definition of family. Due to recent updates in state law, we are no longer allowed to specify the number of unrelated people allowed to live in a home, and we do so in our family definition. So the fix that we're proposing for that is just to, we have it says 4 or fewer, no more than 4 or fewer unrelated individuals constitutes a family. So we're removing the 4 or fewer. So that's just to comply with state law. The second definition change is for mixed use development. We vary development standards in the definitions of mixed use, which is no longer best practice and not ideal for, mine's too loud or too quiet. And not ideal for members of the public or developers to find what sort of regulations apply. So this change is actually what leads to change number 7, which is we're going to remove development standards from the mixed use definition and insert them in the development standards table so they're easier to find. And then lastly, for definition changes is the definition of opiate substitute mental treatment facility. That definition refers to RCWs and state codes that are no longer relevant. So we're not changing the actual meat of the definition, just removing the outdated references to code that no longer exists. So This is the most jazzy one. We have some clarification changes. So I'll do my best to explain this minimum lot size calculation. It's kind of a complicated thing that we've realized as planners who use this code day to day. There's this formula in code for how we establish a minimum lot size when someone asks how many units they can develop. We also have density, so essentially we have two different calculations that get at the same thing, and one of them is slightly more restrictive than the other. And so looking at kind of opened all of the development standards and this calculation and realized that some other time later in code, we actually already established a minimum lot size for things like townhomes in a different portion of code, which isn't linked in this section at all. So the clarification is to remove the complicated formula for minimum lot size in favor of just using maximum density to calculate that, which I'll use round numbers, not real zoning, but if someone wants to, say, develop in a 4 dwelling units per acre zone, you would take the 4 dwelling units divided by an acre, and that gives you a number like 2,500, and then that's how much you need to build in that zone. The current calculation is something like 8,500 for the first 2 lots, and then 1,500 therein, which is strange because it's I think trying to get at the postage stamp of like what does the lot look like but it's very difficult for us as internally as staff to explain. It seems like a remnant that we can't quite figure out how it got to be the way it is. So trying to essentially level the table, make it really simple. The density is what rules here, and then of course none of the development standards are changing, so you'll still have the minimum lot coverage, open space requirements, setback requirements, parking requirements. Nothing substantial would be changing related to development, which is why we figured it would be okay to be a housekeeping amendment. And we can definitely talk about this one more. This is the one that I think you might have the most questions on. Another clarification is removal of extra footnotes. So sometimes we all come to you with changes for code and we forget to remove things that we should have removed. So when Rally the Valley was updated, a bunch of footnotes and things were moved around, and there are a couple footnotes that don't go anywhere. So like they're not mentioned in the table, you'll never get to them. So we are proposing to remove those. There's about 6 of them. Clarification changes continued. In order to incorporate the development standards that would be lost from changing the mixed use definition, we are proposing adding a new row into the mixed use development standards table. So what's hidden in the definitions right now is actually pretty important. It's the minimum percentage of commercial that's required in a mixed use development. And that should be located with the development standards. So we're adding a new row to the table and essentially just moving everything from the definition into the new row in the table. And then the last one, which is also an error from codes way long ago, is in the parking chapter of our code. We have 2 footnotes that essentially say almost the exact same thing, except for the percentage of parking required. So in the midway zone, one of them says it's 3/4 of a parking spot per unit, and the other says it's half of a parking spot per unit, but nowhere in the code do we tell you which one applies. So I did some code deep diving and found that back in 2011, when we were making this code change, they sandwiched the table for some clarification and ease of use, and the nuance was lost. The second footnote is supposed to be for senior developments, and I can pretty clearly track where that came from and how that was lost. And so in the ordinance, in the proposed code changes, I have some ordinance numbers so that we can kind of keep these breadcrumbs for the future. We know why we did what we did. So that's a very riveting presentation about code changes, and I'm available if you have any questions.
All right, any questions? Councilmember Michaud, followed by Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kaelene. My question is about some of the footnotes that were removed from, because it looks like maybe they are part of the Rally the Valley. They were taken out of the table. So are those requirements that were in the footnotes, are those somewhere else?
They're in there's a second table. So the footnotes that are in this table more relate to different types of like commercial uses. So when they were clarifying the industrial use table, some commercial uses got moved up to like the service use table. And essentially these footnotes are for commercial uses that are found in other sections of code. They're actually duplicative, so the exact footnotes are found elsewhere.
So question on the definition for family. I just want to clarify mostly for the public. I think I know the answer, but I want to be really clear. We're removing the restriction on the number of the definition of household, not definition per house. I think there's a statement made, the sentence could have been interpreted that it was the number of people that could reside in a house, but that's actually, this is just defining household.
Yeah, so we actually, that is what the state law was for, and then we looked through our code, and the only place where we restrict the number of people so happens to be in the family definition. So it's not one for one of what the state law was. It wasn't, the state law didn't say your definition of family can't specify a number of people. It had to do with not limiting the number of people in a household. And so this was the only place where we actually physically had a number.
Okay.
So we think that we caught it with this.
But basically, we're not saying that you can have 25 people living in a 2-bedroom house.
No,
in any
this
way.
is just to update with that. We still have other regulations that should be able to get at all of that. We have our group home regulations and our short-term rental regulations. So I think it was just one of those things. This is like it's kind of an arbitrary, how do we decide 4 versus 5 versus 6? And so this should be the only place where we found it. But yeah, we're not essentially having like cracking open the floodgates.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We still have all of the other code sections that should apply.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, so this will go before the Land Use and Planning Board, and then it will come to Public Ops the beginning of December. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
And up next on the agenda is an information-only item. It's the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Update, and we'll talk a little bit about engagement efforts. So welcome, Kristen.
Thank you. It's good to be here. This wonderful animation in the left corner of the screen is not part of Kaelene's presentation. We may take a quick, it's carrying over. We may take a quick break. Multimedia was going to come in and offer to make it removed, but if we're okay with it, we can move forward. Your choice, Chair.
I think we can kind of just push forward.
Okay. Sounds great.
Thank you.
So, good evening. I'm Kristen Holdsworth. I am the Long Range Planning Manager here, and I am excited to give you the second update to this committee on what we're doing with our comprehensive plan. Today, I'm going to give 2 updates. One is just a brief update on our housing allocations and special needs, and the second is on our engagement efforts and our strategies to create robust engagement with the community. So as a quick reminder, we discussed this last time, but we worked through a lot of COVID era to work with the county and the other surrounding King County jurisdictions to determine what our growth allocations and targets were. And we settled on a joint resolution with the other cities where we are now responsible for 10,200 new housing units and 32,000 new jobs, and that's through the year 2044. As we've discussed before, these housing units are not necessarily required to be built, but we are required under state law to ensure that we have the land use zoning capacity for them. There's also a new state law that came out that we have to allocate housing by levels of affordability as well. And so this may or may not look familiar to you. Through the King County Growth Management Policy Planning Council, GMPC, and then the subsequent Affordable Housing Committee, and then the staff level interjurisdictional teams and housing interjurisdictional teams. We have been really hard at work to figure out what this means for King County as a whole, and then distributed down to the cities. And so Councilmember Larimer and Councilmember Core have both been at tons of meetings to discuss this. Just last week on November 3rd, option 3 is the option that was decided on for what that 10,200 units actually looks like by income level. If you have more questions, we can dig into that, but I did want to just give you an update that the Affordable Housing Committee has chosen to allocate by option 3. There's a lot of conversations that are continuing to happen around what that 0 to 30% AMI looks like, as well as the emergency shelter, which is that very end category. There's a lot of conversation and debate with Commerce right now on those numbers and allocations as well. And so staff are continuing to track it and work with the council so that Kent's voice is heard as we're having these conversations. So that's really all we have for housing right now. Is we know that these numbers are going to be finalized sometime, hopefully in early 2023, and that's when really we'll start a lot of the work with the community on having conversations as well on the broader comprehensive plan. And those conversations really are the heart of what we're doing in planning. I always say, you know, I went to school, I could be considered a technical expert for some of these things, but I am not the expert in where you live in terms of knowing what you want and what you value as a resident or a community member. And so my job is to work with the community, hear what their concerns are, what their aspirations are for Kent and what they want, and then to work with them on putting a vision together that works for everyone. And so I am so excited to be working with the community, but part of this is also recognizing that there's a lot of different voices that we are going to be including, and so it's vital to this project. We will be applying an equity lens and working on making sure that inclusion, respect, and transparency, and really making sure that people don't just feel invited but welcomed, and that they deserve a seat at the table of the conversations we're having. And then this is perhaps the most important part of, we have learned, especially through COVID, that you can't just build it and hope the community will come to you. We need to get out into the community, and we need to do it in methods where they feel most comfortable and they feel like they can reach us. And so we've been having some preliminary conversations about what that means. And then really what this engagement process looks like, we'll be working on a plan to have a little bit more formalized strategy, but really we envision different layers filtering up. So the first is the community and partners, and that's the broader Kent community, including residents, businesses, people that come and play in Kent and recreate in Kent, and may not necessarily live here but have strong ties and family connections or other connections. We'll be doing broad engagement, going to other event locations where there's existing events to meet the community in that way. And the information that's twofold. One is to let people know and inform them that we have a project going on, and then it's also to receive feedback at various points of the project. That information will be filtered up to our community advisory group, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is going to be a smaller subset of the community that hopefully is very representative of the various interests in the city, and they will help us kind of decipher what we're seeing from the broader community, as well as then help give us some guidance on policy directions or options from that. And then from there, we'll take that information to our Land Use and Planning Board. We will also come to you with updates every once in a while. And spoiler alert, at the end of this, I do have a couple questions of feedback of how we can work together in the future for this process, so that I'm not here every time and boring you with details, but also that you feel like you are engaged and part of the process and able to have influence as we're going forward. And so wanting to make sure we're open to those conversations as well and having that strong communication. And then finally, council is the ultimate voting authority on this. So Land Use and Planning Board, ECDC, and council will be the ultimate decision makers. My job is to work with the community and work with our departments to give you a plan that hopefully doesn't have any major surprises at the end of it, and so you can feel confident that we have had those conversations and we've done the analysis. So first, we want your input as we're creating our engagement plan. There's various groups and individuals and other community events that we would love to partner with. And so not everyone is going to necessarily be on the Land Use and Planning Board. We have per our city code, a specific amount of seats. But we know that especially in the community and partners and the community advisory group, that there's a lot of opportunity. And so we'll be sending an email out to the full council to ask if you have any recommendations for individuals, organizations, or any other community type gatherings that you think it would be important for us to consider as we're working on our strategy. And I'll say, we can have a conversation on this. It doesn't we're not necessarily asking you to say, I want you to go here on this date, but we may have some questions if you say, work with this organization. We may ask for some follow-up of, do you have specifically a contact there that you could introduce us to? So a lot of this is also making sure that we are using the network of the city as opposed to starting and trying to build new relationships on our own when we know that so many other departments and so many other people have strong relationships with the community. So that's just a teaser to look out for the email. And if you have any questions before I send that email or feedback on the best way to phrase it for the rest of council, we're open for that as well. I wanted to give a preview. In October, we did 2 events, and we kind of flipped Kent 101 on its head, where we were really excited. We gave the overview of what we do in economic and community development, and we did we kind of gave the permitting side of the house, the long-range planning, economic development side, and then we put them to work, and we said, we want to hear from you about some of these things that are happening in the city. And so we asked them a variety of questions, but one of them was, what do you love most about Kent? And so this is just a sampling of what we heard from the most recent Kent 101 cohort. We also asked them what they want Kent to be known for in the future. And there were really interesting conversations that came out of this. There was also a lot of kind of back and forth. So they would say something and then they'd say, well, what do you mean by that quiet zone project? Or what do you mean by this? And so through it, we were able to not just ask for information, but they were then able to ask us questions and clarify about what was happening throughout the city and how we as economic and community development interact with the various things that they were interested in. So these were a couple questions that we asked them. We also asked, how do you want to receive information about this project and how do you want to provide feedback? And it was kind of interesting because we started with just people providing feedback, kind of informally shouting things out, and then we started asking kind of rapid fire ideas and putting things out there, and we started just doing an easy straw poll of up or down votes, and there was a lot of consensus in the room that there was a strong dislike for traditional public meetings. So the idea of have it in a big room, put out some cookies and punch, and have your little poster boards with the staff standing next to it, people said they didn't really feel like that was helpful, but they felt like having these smaller facilitated conversations or having short surveys, they did not want long surveys, but having short surveys that were understandable and well formatted and just accessible was really important. And so we're going to continue to explore this. This is one meeting. We're not going to pretend that this is how everyone in the city feels. I think, race and economic factors and cultural factors it will influence how we do our outreach as well. But this was kind of an early, this is where we saw strong consensus from this group of ways to do outreach. And I think it speaks to a variety of ways of, I'm used to in the pre-COVID days, we kind of did a little bit more of, you have your scoping meeting, you have your midpoint meeting, and then you go to council. And that's just not the way we do planning anymore, and that's not the way we're going to do engagement for this project. Another thing we did, this was more community awareness than feedback. We participated, we had a booth at Haunted Boulevard on Halloween, and we ran out of candy. It was popping this year. It was amazing. So we ended up in the interim giving away little glow bracelets and then got more candy for the rest of the time. But we distributed this postcard on the bottom left. We went with the Kent's strong history with space and discovery, and so we asked the community to help us plan the future. And really the goal was to raise awareness we passed out about 300 postcards to various groupings of families, and in 1 month we saw it was 150 email subscriptions for our listserv. So that's a pretty good return on postcard handouts. And I think we definitely could have had more postcards. We just didn't know what to expect. So next year we're going to come loaded. But we did have a really fun booth. We had this little rocket ship that people could take selfies with, and they really liked it. And so I think we learned a lot of lessons from this first pop-up engagement effort. But things like this are very affordable for us to do as a city. It takes staff time and resources and a little bit of materials cost, but the amount of reach we can get is enormous. And so things like this where we can have a booth somewhere where there's already an event, we're happy to attend and would love to learn more about as well. So this is just a snapshot of things that we're looking for in the future. Next steps, we're going to continue monitoring and advising on these conversations around housing needs allocations for the regional level. And then in November, we will be sending out this month an email to you all asking for some of your input and ideas for engagement. December, we're going to do our big internal staff coordination kickoff meeting. And then in early 2023, we will have our general community kickoff for the event, and then hoping to do a council work session sometime in 2023 to really start getting some of the ideas for you all as a council to have the forum to have these conversations as well. We plan on relying on you all for the majority of the process for the comprehensive plan, but we'd love to talk to you more and get some feedback on when you think it's appropriate to bring in the broader council versus working directly with this committee. So that's all I have. I did have some questions that I would love to ask just to help us as we're going forward, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have beforehand or any feedback you may have.
Councilmember Michaud, followed by Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Kristen. I think you're going to ask us about engagement. So before that, I'm wondering what kind of questions and input and feedback you're looking for from the public.
So thank you. That's a good point. And I think at this point, we're going to have different phases. So the first part is going to be raising awareness to let people know that we're even planning for the future and what we're required to plan for, so that people are aware of the project, and then the ultimate outcome of we have to plan for 10,200 new housing units and 35,000 jobs, but we get to choose how that happens. And so making kind of the project objectives and goals really clear is going to be the first part. As we move further into the process, there will be different, we call them scenarios, where we can say, do we put a little bit of housing everywhere? Do we put a lot of housing in one area or spread it throughout? There's all these different options that we can analyze. And so that'll be really the crux of a lot of our conversations with the community in 2023. And then as we move into 2024, we'll move more into narrowing down the scenarios, as well as then thinking about implementation and other mitigation strategies we may need, or any other quality of life elements that we want to make sure we include in the plan. And so the engagement will vary over the course of the 2 years. And I think as we work with our community advisory group, they'll be digging in much more detail and meet much more frequently than, say, a broad community engagement effort, which may be a limited duration, like a 2-month period of strategic outreach at various parts throughout the project.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm really excited to see this moving forward. We've been waiting a long time, I think, to start getting into the details of it. And on that note, can you remind me how to put off the Kent Housing Options Plan that we approved in 2021 falls into this? Because they had some large amount of public outreach in that as well. So how does that plan influence this one, and how will engagement as a community be different or the same?
Yeah, thank you. And so the KHOP plan, I think, was a huge benefit for us to not, I don't feel like we're behind at all on our comprehensive plan efforts, because we spent so much time laying a really good, I'll say we, Kaelene and HB spent so much time in the ECD department really working with the community and having a lot of these conversations. We know that the comprehensive plan, a majority of the lift, if you will, in a lot of this is going to be around housing options. And honestly, what the data shows is Kent has historically had a lot more housing that's affordable to lower income households. And so one of the things that we are looking for in this plan is also home ownership opportunities and missing middle housing opportunities. And so in a sense, the KHOP plan was kind of the background research that will be further discussed and looked at for policy changes in the comprehensive plan. Engagement-wise, we are keeping everyone that signed up for KHOP on the comp plan outreach. And so a lot of those relationships that were started, we're continuing to build and work with. And then if people want to opt out and they just wanted to talk about KHOP specifically, they're welcome to do that. But because so much of the comprehensive plan will be about housing, it really makes sense to wrap them into this next project as well. And then I do want to highlight Public Works and Parks have done amazing outreach lately with their 2 plans. And our goal, we are not reinventing the wheel. We're going to work with them on implementing what they've done into the comprehensive plan, as well as we just had a conversation today about learning from some of their successful engagement efforts and having connections as well.
So then what questions do you have for us?
They're really hard. So, and I will say I'm the newbie here. So this may be a different format than we have traditionally had these conversations. And so if you prefer a different format in the future, I'm happy to work with you, Chair Troutner, on figuring out what's the best way. But the first is just, do you have any high level success? Like, what is the metric for success for this comprehensive plan for you? Is there anything that's really top of mind of what you want to see in it for Kent?
Councilmember Larmer, and I rely on you for some of this as well because of the committees that you participate on.
Yeah, I think, a lot of it is priority for me is to actually see us take action and make the policy changes needed. And some of the recommendations that came out of KHOP, I know, really focusing on that missing middle housing category, affordable home ownership options, and then also building, finding ways to work with private partners to build the housing in some of the categories that are more difficult. I think we need to get creative and, actively pursue some of these partnerships and these things that will unlock that development, because we can have all the plans and policies and ordinances on file, but it's a matter of getting it built. So I would say that those are my priorities.
Great, thank you.
I also want to add that I think, looking what's happening across the region, because it seems like so very often Kent kind of gets stuck with certain projects and certain things that, I think it's, and we're very lucky because we have a lot of people that sit at the table for those conversations, but making sure that we have a good balance across the region, that we're not the ones that are getting stuck, doing all the work or having particular housing options here that we're not seeing in other areas where it's probably more needed as well. So,
great. Okay, we can move on. The next question is, so we will be working on creating our engagement strategy and plan. There's a variety of different models and methods to do it, and one has been having elected officials also be willing to share on their social media or to be part of a video or something that we use as kind of a Kent-wide, not for a political campaign, but really as a Kent messaging of you each have individual unique relationships with various community groups and your constituents. And so wondering level of support and interest in participating in that. And that doesn't have to, you don't have to go on the record for this, but as we're going forward, is this something that you all would be interested in, opportunities for us to share an email out and say, we're going to be at this event, do you want to come join us at the table, or those variety of ways, or are there other ways that you as a council member would like to be involved?
I think we're all shaking our heads.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
And I love your thinking outside the box. The pictures and the engagement at the Boulevard event looked really fun.
Mm-hmm.
We had a really good time.
I think we're on a roll here. We've got a good thing going. So absolutely love to help out in that way.
Great, thank you. And I will say there are a couple people that thanked me when we were out of candy when I gave them a postcard. And I told them they could come back for candy, but they were so thankful that that the city was doing something and that we were willing to talk to them about our plans. And so I think it just, the community seems so excited about it already. We're excited to see where it goes. And then my final question is, in planning, we like to learn from our neighbors and we like to copy what they're doing well and not repeat missteps. And so I'm wondering if there's any cities or counties or anyone around the area that you've said, like, wow, they're doing really interesting engagement work. Or there's something that I would like us, I saw this and it was really cool. So anything you'd like us to know about as something that was interesting.
Specific to engagement?
Well, if you would like to broaden the topic around other comprehensive plan topics, that's okay too. I was thinking engagement, but I'm open to other suggestions as well.
Councilmember Michaud, I see you getting ready to push your button.
It's not a fully formed thought yet, but I have noticed a lot on Tacoma parks and also Seattle parks on their Instagram pages and stuff. They will publish a lot of information about in nice infographic type ways, a lot about their plans, and it's really informative and a good way to get engagement on very specific plans or ideas or whatever.
Thank you.
And I don't know how much we engage the community with economic and community development as we do with other departments in the city. I know, I've seen some stuff on public works and some stuff on parks, but I think there's a big opportunity for us to highlight some of the things that we're doing in this committee.
Thanks.
But I think your questions also give us an opportunity to kind of do our homework and take some of those things that you've asked us about and get back to you if there's other things that pop into our head that we feel like would be important to share with you.
Great. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Larmer, did you have?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Thank you. Whoops. Sorry.
And then my last question is, going forward, how would you like us to work with this committee and then the broader council as well? I don't want you to feel like you're put on the spot for not having time to prepare, so we can provide questions beforehand. We could communicate as part of kind of our agenda items, have questions for council discussion. That's something we could do in the future. Or if you would prefer, we could do a survey and people could respond that way. However people want to think through kind of how to do this while complying with all of the Open Public Meeting Act requirements.
Well, and I don't know if, there's any workshop schedules where we're going to have this come before the entire council down the road as well?
In February.
Okay. And I think, some of our small introductions here with this committee, but then also making sure the entire council is able to provide feedback to you. Is that what you're kind of looking for?
That's what we were, yeah. So just wanting to check and make sure. I think, I don't want us to necessarily be here at every ECDC if you think that there's not enough substantive updates, but if you want monthly updates, we can come. So it's just kind of feeling out if you have a sense of what you would like for updates going forward and the method of them, if you'd prefer that we make sure we're getting to workshop once every 6 months or so or anything, just so we can plan out our schedules.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You had mentioned getting the questions beforehand. That way you'll get better responses if you send me the questions beforehand. I'll say that.
Councilmember Larmer.
I love that we have the questions. I think this is great engagement, and I really thank you for bringing that, because I think that, knowing that there's going to be questions asked, whether they're given to us beforehand or during the presentation, is just, a great thought starter, conversation starter. So please continue doing that. I really love this part. And then I think, as far as frequency of updates, I would say if things have changed or there's something interesting, please come back. I don't know that you need to come back every month if there's not been substantive changes. But I feel like 6 months is almost too infrequent. Maybe we plan every third month, unless, maybe it's the second month because there's been something significant that you found out or discovered. So.
Okay, great.
And that's something that Kurt and I can work together with when we go to plan things for the agenda down the road.
I do want to just chime in a little bit. I mean, the idea, and Kristen and I have obviously talked about this quite a bit. This project is huge. It's our biggest project. It's our biggest policy piece for the city. It's our comprehensive plan. This going forward, you guys are going to be sick of seeing us because this one's going to take a lot of care and feeding at the council side. We really wanted to use, obviously, our committee because a lot of that's going to get done there. So I'll say it's going to go in kind of fits and starts where 3 months is probably a good frequency, probably reliable there. It'll be at least every 3 months with an update. Mm-hmm. That said, is when we're busy cooking with community engagement and involvement, it very likely could be more increased frequency than that. And so I'll be more direct with it. We would love to use this committee as kind of our sounding board for either responding to what we've heard and do we take direction from that, or at least giving you what we've heard and then kind of double down, investing in that even more. So we're going to be using this committee to kind of get some good direction from it. We've talked over the years that this next comp plan, it's going to be housing, 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 housing. That's what's ahead of us right now. So there's going to be a bunch of super fun conversations and some that are technical. And so we want to use the committee for that. So there's going to be a ton of info, and her game plan is second to none. It's amazing. So what she has kind of cribbed already for me to look at, and there's probably way more than I've seen, we're in good hands here. It's a great approach, and I think you guys will be really, really happy with the way this is going. So
I'm looking forward to it. So.
All right. Any other questions for us?
That was it. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. I appreciate you letting me pick your brains. And I think going forward, this is, as Kurt was saying, this is really something that we're excited to dig into, but there's going to be a lot to talk about. And so knowing that you're okay with us coming to you more frequently than not is reassuring to hear, and we will structure accordingly. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to being a part of the process.
Great.
Thank you. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we are adjourned.